The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the Fort Kearny trading post, and Beatrice Barrett clutched her carpetbag so tightly. Her knuckles turned white as she stared through the dusty window at the horse tied to the hitching post outside, its massive flanks heaving with each breath. It was May of 1873, and Nebraska stretched out in all directions like an endless sea of prairie grass. Beatrice had traveled all the way from Boston, answering an advertisement placed by a rancher named Grant Palmer who sought a wife. She had been honest about many things in her correspondence: her education, her love of books, her skill with a needle, but she had left out one critical detail. Now, as she watched that horse toss its enormous head, her secret sat like a stone in her stomach. The driver opened the door and extended his weathered hand. "Miss Barrett, welcome to Fort Kearny. Your intended is waiting inside the trading post." Beatrice forced herself to move, to take the driver's hand and step down onto the wooden platform. Her legs trembled, though whether from the long journey or the proximity to the horse, she could not say. The animal turned its huge eye toward her, and she felt her breath catch. "Your trunk will be along shortly," the driver said, tipping his hat before climbing back up to his seat. Beatrice stood frozen, watching the horse. Its tail swished and she flinched. The animal was enormous, easily 16 hands high, with powerful muscles rippling beneath its glossy coat. She thought of another horse, years ago, rearing up with wild eyes and flailing hooves. She thought of her younger brother's scream cut short. She thought of the blood. "Miss Barrett." The voice was deep, warm, and came from just behind her. Beatrice spun around, nearly dropping her bag. The man standing before her was tall, over 6 feet, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a striking gray-green, like sage after rain, and they studied her with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Mr. Palmer." She managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Grant," he said, removing his hat. "Just Grant. It is good to finally meet you in person. Your letters were—" He paused, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "They were the highlight of my winter." Despite her anxiety, Beatrice felt warmth spread through her chest. His letters had been the same for her, full of thoughtful observations about the land, the changing seasons, his hopes for the future. He wrote about books he had read and asked her opinions. He had seemed kind on paper. In person, he seemed even better, with an honest face and gentle eyes. "The pleasure is mine," she said, trying to steady her voice. "Are you all right? You look pale. The journey must have been difficult." "I am just tired," Beatrice lied. Behind Grant, the horse stamped its hoof against the ground, and she jumped, Grant's brow furrowed. "Come inside. Mrs. Henderson has prepared refreshments. We can talk, get to know each other a bit before we head out to the ranch." "Head out?" Beatrice's voice pitched higher. "How far is your ranch?" "About 8 miles west." "Not far." Grant gestured toward the horse. "Thunder is a good, steady mount. We can ride together, and I will have someone bring your trunk out later in the wagon." Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. "Ride on that horse?" "Well, yes. It is the quickest way. Unless you would prefer to wait for the supply wagon tomorrow, though I should warn you, the wagon ride is much rougher and takes twice as long." She opened her mouth, then closed it. There was no delaying this conversation. Grant would need to know. He deserved to know before they went any further with this arrangement. "Mr. Palmer, Grant, I need to tell you something." Beatrice forced herself to meet his eyes. "I am afraid of horses." Grant blinked. "Afraid? You mean nervous." "Many people who are not used to riding feel that way, but I assure you, Thunder is very gentle." "No," Beatrice said, her hands trembling. "I mean I am terrified of them. I have not been near a horse in over 10 years. I cannot ride. I will not ride." The words hung in the air between them. Grant's expression shifted from confusion to concern. But you live in Nebraska now. My ranch is 8 miles from town. Horses are not just transportation here, Miss Barrett. They are necessary for survival. I know. Tears pricked at Beatrice's eyes, and she hated herself for crying already, for showing weakness before they had even properly met. I should have told you in my letters. I wanted to, but I was afraid you would not send for me. I am sorry. If you wish to send me back to Boston, I will understand. Grant was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Then, to her surprise, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Let us go inside. Tell me why you are afraid. Then we will figure out what to do. The trading post was dim and cool after the bright sunshine outside. Mrs. Henderson, a plump woman with kind eyes, brought them coffee and fresh bread with butter. Grant led Beatrice to a table in the corner, away from the other patrons. Tell me, he said simply. Beatrice wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup, drawing strength from its heat. I had a younger brother, Thomas. He was only 8 years old and I was 12. We were visiting our aunt's farm in Connecticut. Thomas loved the horses there. He was always trying to sneak into the stables to pet them, to give them sugar cubes. She paused, her throat tight. One afternoon he went into the stall of a new horse, a stallion that had just been purchased. No one knew he was there. The horse was temperamental and something startled it. By the time they pulled Thomas out, it was too late. Grant's hand covered hers on the table. I am so sorry. I saw it happen, Beatrice continued, the words spilling out now. I was looking for Thomas and I heard him cry out. I saw the horse rear up. I saw. She closed her eyes. I have not been able to go near a horse since. Even the sound of hoofbeats makes my heart race. My parents thought I would overcome it with time, but I never did. And yet you came all the way out here, knowing you would need to face them again. Beatrice opened her eyes and looked at him. I came because your letters made me feel less alone for the first time in years. I came because Boston held nothing for me anymore. My parents died 2 years ago and I have been living with my uncle who made it clear I was a burden. When I saw your advertisement, something told me to answer it. Perhaps it was foolish. It was not foolish, Grant said firmly. It was brave. Braver than you know. He sat back thinking. We will take the supply wagon tomorrow. It will give us time to get to know each other better, and it will give me time to think about how to help you. Help me. Beatrice was confused. You still want to marry me, even knowing this. Miss Barrett, everyone carries fear. The question is whether we let it control us or whether we face it. You have already shown courage by coming here and by telling me the truth. The least I can do is show you the same respect. He smiled, and it transformed his whole face. Besides, I meant what I wrote in my letters. I have been looking for someone to share my life with, someone who can see the beauty in this harsh land, someone who thinks deeply and feels deeply. That is you. A fear of horses does not change that. Beatrice felt tears slide down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of relief. Thank you. However, Grant added, his tone gentle but serious, we need to work on this fear. I will not force you onto a horse tomorrow or next week or even next month. But eventually, you will need to learn. Not just to ride, but to trust them. Life on a ranch requires it. I know, Beatrice whispered. I want to overcome this. I truly do. I am just not sure I can. Then we will find out together. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the trading post talking. Grant told her about his ranch, the Palmer Ranch, which his father had established 20 years earlier. His parents had both passed away, his father from pneumonia 3 years ago and his mother from influenza the year before. He had a foreman named Jack who had been with the family for 15 years, and a handful of ranch hands who helped with the cattle and horses. Yes, he bred horses as well as raised cattle. It was a detail that made Beatrice's stomach clench, but she tried to listen without panicking. He asked her about Boston, about her life there, about the books she loved. She told him about teaching at a small school for girls, about her love of poetry and literature, about how she had felt trapped in her uncle's house with its dark rooms and constant criticism. As the sun began to set, Mrs. Henderson showed Beatrice to a small room above the trading post where she could spend the night. Grant would sleep in the boarding house across the street, and they would leave in the morning with the supply wagon. Alone in the room, Beatrice stood at the window and looked out at the vast prairie. In the corral beside the trading post, several horses moved in the dimming light. She watched them, her heart pounding, and wondered if she would ever be able to see them as anything other than dangerous. The next morning dawned clear and warm. Beatrice dressed carefully in her traveling clothes and met Grant outside. The supply wagon was hitched to a team of 2 large draft horses, and Beatrice felt her chest tighten at the sight of them. Grant noticed immediately. He came to stand beside her, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his solid presence. "They are Belgians," he said quietly. "Draft horses. They are bred to be calm and steady. See how slowly they move, how patient they are while the driver loads the supplies." Beatrice watched. The horses did seem different from the wild-eyed stallion of her nightmares. They stood placidly, occasionally shifting their weight but making no sudden movements. "Can you ride in the wagon?" Grant asked. "Yes," Beatrice said, though her voice shook. "As long as I do not have to touch them." "You will not have to touch them." The ride to the Palmer Ranch took most of the morning. The wagon bumped and jostled over the rutted trail, and Beatrice gripped the seat to keep from being thrown around. Grant sat beside her, pointing out landmarks, telling her about the land. He showed her where a creek ran, though it was too far to see from the trail. He pointed out a formation of rocks where Pawnee had once camped, though they had moved to reservation lands years ago. He told her about the harsh winters and the beautiful springs when wildflowers covered the prairie in waves of color. Beatrice tried to focus on his words, on the landscape, on anything except the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats and the massive hindquarters of the horses in front of her. When the ranch finally came into view, Beatrice felt a surge of relief. The main house was a solid structure of wood and stone, larger than she had expected. There was a barn, a bunkhouse, several corrals, and various outbuildings. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and in the nearest corral, at least a dozen horses moved about. Grant helped her down from the wagon, and several men emerged from the barn. The foreman, Jack, was a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. The ranch hands, young men named Peter and Sam, nodded respectfully. There was also a cook, an older Chinese man named Lai Wai who had come to Nebraska after working on the railroad. He greeted Beatrice with a slight bow and a welcoming smile. "Let me show you the house," Grant said, offering his arm. The interior was clean and well-maintained, with sturdy furniture and whitewashed walls. There were 2 bedrooms, a main room with a fireplace, and a kitchen with a cast-iron stove. It was simple but comfortable, and Beatrice felt herself relaxing as Grant showed her around. "You will have the bedroom," Grant said, gesturing to the larger of the 2 rooms. "I will take the smaller one until we are properly married and you are comfortable with other arrangements." Beatrice felt herself blush. They had not yet discussed when the wedding would take place. "I would like some time," she said carefully, "to adjust, to be certain this is the right decision for both of us." "Of course," Grant agreed. "Reverend Matthews comes through Fort Kearney once a month. He will be back in 3 weeks. That gives us time to get to know each other better, and it gives me time to help you with your fear." Over the following days, Beatrice settled into life at the ranch. She helped Lai Wai in the kitchen, learning to cook for the ranch hands. She mended clothes and organized the household, which had been neglected since Grant's mother passed away. She wrote letters and read books from Grant's surprisingly extensive library. In the evenings, she and Grant would sit on the porch and talk, their conversations ranging from philosophy to practical matters of running a ranch. But every time she stepped outside, she was confronted by the horses. They were everywhere. In the corrals, tied near the barn, being ridden by the ranch hands, the sounds of their whinnies and snorts filled the air. Beatrice tried to avoid them, taking circuitous routes around the buildings, but it was impossible to escape them entirely. Grant noticed, of course. He was patient, never pushing her, but she could see the concern in his eyes. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, he finally broached the subject. "Will you tell me more about Thomas?" he asked gently. Beatrice was quiet for a long moment. "He was funny," she finally said. "Always laughing, always getting into mischief. He wanted to be a veterinarian when he grew up, someone who took care of animals. He loved all creatures, but especially horses." She smiled sadly. "He would have loved it here." "I think he would have," Grant agreed. "What happened to him was a terrible accident, Beatrice. But it was an accident. The horse that killed him was poorly trained and poorly handled. A good horse, properly trained and treated with respect, is not dangerous." "My mind knows that," Beatrice said, "but my heart cannot seem to accept it. Every time I see a horse, all I can see is Thomas." "Then perhaps we need to give you new memories," Grant suggested. "Better memories to replace the terrible one." "How?" Grant stood and extended his hand. "Come with me, just to the corral fence." "You do not have to go inside, just stand there with me." Beatrice's first instinct was to refuse, but she looked at Grant's open, honest face and found herself taking his hand. His palm was warm and calloused, and his grip was firm. Together they walked down the porch steps and across the yard toward the nearest corral. As they approached, Beatrice's heart began to hammer. She could see 3 horses inside the fence, all of them moving slowly in the evening light. One was Thunder, Grant's gray gelding. The other 2 were mares, one chestnut and one black. "This is close enough," Beatrice said, stopping about 10 feet from the fence. "All right," Grant agreed. He did not push her closer, just stood beside her, still holding her hand. "See the black mare? That is Midnight. She is gentle as a kitten. I bought her from a family moving back east. They had a 6-year-old daughter who rode her every day." Beatrice watched the mare. She was beautiful, with a glossy coat and intelligent eyes, but she was still a horse, still large and powerful and frightening. "And the chestnut is Belle. She is expecting a foal in a few months. She is calm, steady. I trust her completely." They stood there for perhaps 15 minutes, just watching the horses. Grant talked quietly about each animal, about their personalities and quirks. Gradually, Beatrice felt her heart beat slow. The horses were not doing anything threatening. They simply grazed and swished their tails and occasionally looked toward the fence with mild curiosity. "Can we go back now?" Beatrice finally asked. "Of course." They walked back to the house, and Grant squeezed her hand before releasing it. "You did well," he said. "Tomorrow, if you are willing, we will do the same thing, just stand and watch. No pressure." "All right," Beatrice agreed, though the thought made her anxious. True to his word, Grant took her to the corral fence the next evening. This time, they stood a bit closer, about 5 feet from the fence. The horses largely ignored them, going about their evening routine. Grant continued his gentle narration, pointing out behaviors and explaining what they meant. "See how Thunder is standing with his weight on 3 legs. That is how horses rest. They can actually sleep standing up." "That seems uncomfortable," Beatrice said, trying to focus on the information rather than her fear. "They also lie down to sleep sometimes, but standing allows them to run if danger approaches. It is instinct." Grant glanced at her. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous," Beatrice admitted, "but not as panicked as before." "That is progress." Each evening they repeated the exercise. After a week, Beatrice could stand at the fence without her hands shaking. After 2 weeks, she could watch the horses without imagining Thomas's death. The memories were still there, the grief was still present, but it was no longer the only thing she felt when she saw a horse. Grant was unfailingly patient. He never rushed her, never showed frustration when she balked or needed to step back. In the process, Beatrice found herself falling in love with him. It was not the dramatic, sweeping love of novels, but something quieter and deeper. It was the way he remembered that she liked her coffee with extra sugar, the way he brought her wildflowers from the prairie, the way he listened when she talked about her fears and dreams, the way he looked at her like she was precious and valuable just as she was. 3 weeks after her arrival, Reverend Matthews arrived in Fort Kearney. Grant asked Beatrice if she was ready to marry him, and without hesitation, she said yes. They rode into town in the wagon, Beatrice more comfortable now with the draft horses, though still not willing to touch them. The wedding was simple, held in the small church with Mrs. Henderson and a few townspeople as witnesses. Beatrice wore her best dress, and Grant wore a clean shirt and vest. When he slipped a simple gold band on her finger and kissed her for the first time, Beatrice felt a warmth and rightness that she had not known she was missing. That night, back at the ranch, their marriage was consummated with tenderness and care. Grant was gentle, attentive to her nervousness, and Beatrice found joy in their union. Afterward, lying in his arms, she felt truly safe for the first time since Thomas had died. The next morning, Grant brought her breakfast in bed, grinning like a boy. "Good morning, Mrs. Palmer." "Good morning, husband," Beatrice replied, happiness bubbling up inside her. "I have something to show you today," Grant said, "if you are willing." "What is it?" A surprise. "But you will need to come to the barn." Beatrice's smile faltered. "Grant, I do not know if I am ready to go inside the barn yet." "Trust me," he said simply. She did trust him. Over the past 3 weeks, he had proven himself trustworthy in every way, so she dressed and followed him across the yard to the barn. The smell of hay and horses hit her as they approached, and her steps slowed, but Grant took her hand and led her inside. In one of the stalls, Belle, the chestnut mare, stood beside a tiny foal. The baby was all legs and curiosity, with a coat the color of honey and a white star on its forehead. "She was born early this morning," Grant said softly. "I thought you might like to see." Beatrice stared at the foal. It was so small, so impossibly fragile. As she watched, it wobbled over to its mother and began to nurse, its little tail flicking back and forth. "Can we go closer?" The words surprised her as much as they surprised Grant. "Yes," he said, opening the stall door carefully. "Belle is very protective, but she knows me. Stay close to me and move slowly." They entered the stall together. Belle watched them with alert eyes but did not seem alarmed. The foal, having finished nursing, turned its attention to the newcomers. With the fearless curiosity of the very young, it took a tentative step toward them. "Hold out your hand," Grant murmured. "Let him smell you." Beatrice extended a trembling hand. The foal stretched out its neck, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed her fingers. Then, to her amazement, it nuzzled her palm with its soft muzzle. Tears spilled down Beatrice's cheeks. The foal was warm, gentle, innocent. There was nothing frightening about it. It was simply a baby, new to the world and curious about everything. "Can I touch him?" she whispered. "Yes, just move slowly." Beatrice reached out with her other hand and gently stroked the foal's neck. Its coat was unbelievably soft, and she could feel the warmth of its small body. The foal leaned into her touch, clearly enjoying the attention. "He likes you," Grant said, his voice filled with pride and affection. "He is beautiful," Beatrice breathed. "What will you name him?" "I thought you might like to name him." Beatrice looked at the foal at its honey-colored coat and white star. "Promise," she said. "His name is Promise." "That is a good name," Grant agreed. They stood in the stall for a long time, Beatrice petting the foal while Belle watched benignly. When they finally left, Beatrice felt lighter than she had in years. She had touched a horse. She had not panicked. The world had not ended. Over the following weeks, Beatrice visited Promise every day. She brought him treats, brushed his coat as he grew, and talked to him while he explored his stall and the small paddock where Belle kept him close. Grant watched these interactions with quiet satisfaction, never interfering but always nearby if she needed him. As Promise grew, he became bolder. He would nicker when he saw Beatrice approach, would trot over to greet her, would follow her around the paddock like a puppy. Beatrice found herself laughing at his antics, at the way he would suddenly kick up his heels and run in circles for the sheer joy of it. "He has bonded with you," Grant observed one afternoon. "He thinks you are part of his herd." "Is that good?" Beatrice asked, scratching behind Promise's ears. "It is very good. It means he trusts you completely." One evening, as summer turned toward autumn, Grant brought a saddle blanket and a small saddle to the paddock. "I thought we might start working with Promise," he said. "Just getting him used to the equipment. He is old enough now to begin basic training." Beatrice watched as Grant laid the blanket across Promise's back. The young horse snorted but did not shy away. Grant praised him, offering a piece of apple as a reward. Then he carefully placed the saddle on the blanket, cinching it loosely. Promise danced sideways, unnerved by the new sensation, but Grant soothed him with quiet words and gentle hands. After a few minutes, the horse calmed down. "Would you like to try leading him?" Grant asked Beatrice. "Leading him. Just walking beside him, holding his lead rope. It would help him learn to trust you even more." Beatrice hesitated, then nodded. Grant handed her the rope and showed her how to hold it properly. Then, with Beatrice beside Promise's shoulder and Grant on the other side, they began to walk around the paddock. Promise followed willingly, his stride matching Beatrice's. She could feel the power in him, even at his young age, but she could also feel his trust. He looked to her for guidance, listening when she said his name, stopping when she stopped. "You are a natural," Grant said, his eyes shining with pride. From that day forward, Beatrice took an active role in Promise's training. Grant taught her how to work with the young horse, how to read his body language, how to communicate through touch and voice and subtle cues. It was slow, patient work, but Beatrice discovered she loved it. With Promise, she was not afraid. He had never hurt her, had only ever shown her affection and trust. And gradually, through him, she began to see all horses differently. By the time winter arrived, Promise was fully halter-trained and comfortable with a saddle. He was still too young to be ridden, but he was ready to learn everything else. Beatrice spent hours with him, even in the cold, teaching him to stand for grooming, to pick up his hooves for cleaning, to respond to her voice commands. Grant watched these transformations with wonder. His mail-order bride, who had arrived terrified of horses, was becoming a skilled horsewoman. More importantly, she was healing from an old wound, replacing painful memories with joyful ones. Their marriage deepened as well. Beatrice and Grant fell into a comfortable rhythm, working together during the days and holding each other at night. They talked about everything, their conversations ranging from trivial matters to profound questions about life and meaning. They laughed together, sometimes at lie-wise dry humor, sometimes at the antics of the ranch animals, sometimes at private jokes that no one else would understand. In February, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. She told Grant one evening after supper, nervous about his reaction. He stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could hardly breathe. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Beatrice asked, pulling back to see his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Grant said, tears shining in his eyes. "You have given me so much, Beatrice. Love, partnership, and now a child. I am the luckiest man in Nebraska." As Beatrice's pregnancy progressed, Grant became even more protective. He did not want her doing heavy work, did not want her taking risks. But he also understood that she needed to continue working with promise. The young horse was her project, her joy, and he would not take that from her. By spring, when the prairie exploded with wildflowers, Promise was a yearling, leggy, and full of energy. Beatrice could lead him anywhere, could groom him completely, could even stand on a mounting block beside him without fear. She had not yet ridden him. He was still too young for that. But she had ridden in wagons and even, on one memorable occasion, sat on Thunder while Grant led the gentle gelding around the paddock. It was a breakthrough moment. Sitting on Thunder's broad back, feeling his warmth and movement beneath her, Beatrice had closed her eyes and breathed deeply. When she opened them, Grant was looking up at her with such love and pride that her heart swelled. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Safe," Beatrice answered honestly. "I feel safe." Their son was born in late September, a healthy boy with a strong cry and his father's gray-green eyes. They named him Thomas, in honor of the brother Beatrice had lost. It felt right to give the name to this new life, to transform something painful into something beautiful. Grant was a devoted father, walking the floor with Thomas when he cried, changing his nappies without complaint, staring at the baby with an expression of awe and tenderness. Beatrice watched them together and felt her heart might burst from happiness. Lai Y proved to be a doting uncle figure, cooking special broths to help Beatrice recover her strength and carving a small rattle for the baby. Jack and the ranch hands were equally smitten, taking turns holding Thomas and making ridiculous faces to coax out his rare smiles. When Thomas was 3 months old, Beatrice bundled him up and carried him out to meet Promise. The young horse, now nearly 2 years old, approached cautiously, curious about the small creature in Beatrice's arms. She let Promise sniff the baby, and to her delight, Thomas reached out a tiny hand and grabbed the horse's whisker. Promise snorted in surprise but did not pull away. Grant, standing nearby, laughed. "He has your courage, Beatrice." "And your gentleness," she replied, smiling at her husband. That winter was harsh, with heavy snows that buried the prairie and temperatures that plummeted below zero. The family huddled close, keeping the fire burning day and night. Grant told stories of his childhood, and Beatrice sang lullabies her mother had taught her. Thomas grew and changed, becoming more alert, more responsive, more himself. When spring returned, Promise was ready to be ridden for the first time. He was well-trained, responsive, and most importantly, bonded with Beatrice. Grant suggested that she be the first to ride him. "Me." Beatrice was stunned. "But I have hardly ridden at all." "You have ridden Thunder several times now," Grant pointed out, "and you have spent more time with Promise than anyone. He trusts you completely. I think you should be his first rider." Beatrice looked at the young horse, who had grown into a beautiful animal with a honey-colored coat and intelligent eyes. She thought about the terrified woman who had arrived at Fort Kearny 2 years earlier, too frightened to even stand near a horse. She thought about Thomas, both the brother she had lost and the son she had gained. She thought about Grant, who had shown her such patience and love, who had helped her become someone she never thought she could be. "All right," she said, "I will do it." They prepared carefully. Grant checked all the equipment multiple times, ensuring everything was secure and properly fitted. Jack held Promise's head, talking to him in soothing tones. Beatrice approached the horse, her heart pounding but her mind clear. "I am going to ride you now," she told Promise, stroking his neck. "Please be good to me." Promise turned his head and nuzzled her shoulder, as if to say he would always be good to her. With Grant's help, Beatrice put her foot in the stirrup and swung up into the saddle. For a moment, sitting atop the horse, she felt a flash of panic. She was so high up. Promise was so powerful beneath her. But then Promise turned his head to look at her, his eyes calm and trusting, and the panic faded. "How does it feel?" Grant asked, standing at Promise's head. "Strange," Beatrice admitted. "But good, I feel good. Do you want to walk?" "Yes." Grant led Promise forward, and the horse walked calmly, responding to the gentle pressure of Beatrice's legs and the touch of the reins. They circled the paddock once, twice, 3 times. Then Grant stepped back. "Try guiding him yourself. Just gentle pressure with your legs to go forward. Pull back lightly on the reins to stop. He knows what to do." Beatrice took a deep breath and squeezed her legs. Promise moved forward smoothly. She guided him around the paddock, her confidence growing with each step. The horse responded to her every cue, attentive and willing. She was riding. She was actually riding, and she was not afraid. When she finally asked Promise to stop, and Grant helped her dismount, Beatrice was shaking, but this time it was from exhilaration rather than fear. "I did it," she said, looking at Grant with wide eyes. "I rode him. I rode a horse." Grant pulled her into his arms. "You did more than that. You faced your greatest fear and you conquered it. I am so proud of you." Beatrice buried her face in his chest and cried, but they were tears of joy and release. She had carried the weight of her fear for so long. Now, finally, she could set it down. Over the following months, Beatrice rode Promise regularly. She grew more confident, more skilled. She learned to trot and canter, to guide Promise over rough terrain, to trust him completely. The horse seemed to understand how precious this bond was, always careful with her, always responsive. She also began riding other horses. Thunder became a familiar friend, steady and reliable. She even rode Belle, Promise's mother, appreciating the mare's calm demeanor. Each ride built her confidence further, until horses were no longer objects of terror but partners and companions. Grant taught her everything he knew about horses, about reading their moods and needs, about caring for them properly. Beatrice proved to be an excellent student, asking thoughtful questions and applying what she learned. Soon, she was helping with the training of other young horses, bringing the same patient, gentle approach that had worked so well with Promise. The ranch prospered. Grant's reputation for well-trained horses spread, and buyers came from as far as Kansas City to purchase his stock. Beatrice's involvement improved the operation, as she had a gift for calming nervous horses and identifying potential problems before they became serious. Their family grew as well. When Thomas was 2 years old, Beatrice gave birth to a daughter they named Emma, a lively child with her mother's dark hair and quick smile. 2 years after that, another son arrived whom they named Samuel. The house rang with children's laughter, and the ranch was filled with life. Promise remained Beatrice's special horse. Even after other horses were added to their personal string, Promise was the one she rode most often. He knew her better than any other animal, responding to the slightest shift in her weight or the softest word. Together, they would ride across the prairie, Beatrice reveling in the freedom and beauty of the landscape, Promise carrying her safely wherever she wished to go. One evening, when Beatrice had been at the ranch for 5 years, she and Grant sat on the porch watching the sunset. The children were asleep inside, worn out from a day of play. The ranch was quiet except for the occasional sound of horses moving in the corrals. "You remember the day you arrived?" Grant asked, taking her hand. "I remember being terrified," Beatrice said. "Terrified of the horses, terrified that you would reject me once you knew the truth, terrified that I had made a terrible mistake coming here. And now," Beatrice looked out at the prairie, painted gold and orange by the setting sun. She thought about how far she had come, how much she had changed. "Now I cannot imagine being anywhere else. This is my home. You are my home." Grant lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. "You gave me everything I was looking for when I placed that advertisement and so much more. You brought light and love into this house. You gave me children. You became a true partner in every sense. You taught me to trust again," Beatrice said softly. "Not just horses, but myself. You showed me that fear does not have to be permanent, that with patience and love anything can be healed." "We healed each other," Grant said. "I was alone before you came. Oh, I had the ranch and the work, but I did not have anyone to share it with. I did not have someone who understood me, who challenged me to be better. You gave me that." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the corral, Promise whinnied, and Beatrice smiled. That sound, which had once filled her with dread, now brought only happiness. As the years passed, the Palmer Ranch became known throughout Nebraska, not just for its quality horses, but for the woman who trained them with such skill and compassion. Beatrice Palmer, once too frightened to even look at a horse, became renowned for her ability to work with difficult animals, to build trust where others had failed. She taught her children to ride, starting them young on gentle ponies, making sure they understood that horses were to be respected and treated with kindness. Thomas, their eldest, inherited his mother's gift with horses and his father's steady nature. Emma was fearless, always wanting to ride faster and jump higher, giving her parents more than a few scares. Samuel was gentle and thoughtful, preferring to spend his time in the barn grooming and talking to the horses rather than riding them hard. Grant and Beatrice grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They faced hardships, as all families do, harsh winters, economic downturns, the occasional injury or illness. But they faced everything together, their partnership strong and unshakable. Promise lived to the remarkable age of 28, spending his final years in peaceful retirement, grazing in the pasture and accepting treats from the Palmer children and grandchildren. When he finally passed away peacefully in his sleep, Beatrice mourned him deeply. Grant held her while she cried, understanding that she was not just grieving a horse, but honoring everything Promise had represented: healing, courage, and second chances. They buried Promise on a hill overlooking the prairie, marking his grave with a stone Grant carved himself. The inscription was simple: Promise, a faithful friend who taught us all to trust. More horses came and went over the years, but none held quite the same place in Beatrice's heart. Promise had been special, the one who had shown her that love and patience could transform fear into strength. When Beatrice was in her 60s, a young woman arrived at the ranch, referred by the doctor in Fort Kearny. She was pregnant and alone, abandoned by her family when they discovered her condition. She had nowhere to go and was desperate for work. Beatrice saw herself in this young woman, saw the fear and uncertainty, the hope mixed with despair. She hired her immediately, giving her a room in the house and work that suited her condition. She and Grant became like parents to her, supporting her through her pregnancy and helping her care for her baby afterward. The young woman stayed for 3 years, saving her money and learning everything Beatrice could teach her about horses and ranching. When she finally left to start her own life, she hugged Beatrice tightly and whispered, "You gave me a second chance, just like Mr. Palmer gave you." Beatrice understood then that her story had come full circle. She had arrived in Nebraska broken and afraid, and Grant had helped her heal. Now, she could do the same for others, offering the same grace and patience that had been shown to her. Grant lived to be 73 years old. In his final days, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, he held Beatrice's hand and told her one last time how much he loved her, how she had made his life complete. "I was looking for a wife," he said, his voice weak but his eyes still bright. "But I found so much more. I found my best friend, my partner, my great love. And I found mine," Beatrice whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You saved me, Grant. You showed me how to live again." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. Then, with a final squeeze of her hand, he closed his eyes and slipped away peacefully. Beatrice grieved deeply, but she was not alone. Her children stayed close, making sure she ate and slept, listening when she wanted to talk about their father. Thomas took over the running of the ranch, bringing his own wife and children to live in the main house. Emma, who had married a banker in Omaha, visited often, bringing laughter and energy. Samuel, who had become a veterinarian, returned to Fort Kearny to practice and was a frequent visitor to the ranch. Beatrice lived for another decade, spending her days with her grandchildren, teaching them to ride, telling them stories of their grandfather and the mail-order bride who had been afraid of horses. She told them about promise, about healing and trust, about how love could transform even the deepest fears. On a warm spring morning, when the prairie was covered with wildflowers, Beatrice Palmer passed away in her sleep. She was 82 years old. Her family laid her to rest beside Grant, on the same hill where Promise was buried. The three graves together told a story of love, of courage, of how broken things could be mended. At the funeral, Thomas spoke about his mother, about her strength and gentleness, about how she had taught them all what it meant to face your fears. "She arrived in Nebraska terrified," he said, "but she did not let that fear define her. With our father's help, she became one of the finest horsewomen I have ever known. More importantly, she became an example to all of us of how to live with courage and grace." After the service, as the family gathered at the ranch house, Emma found an old letter in her mother's desk. It was one of the first letters Grant had written to Beatrice in Boston, asking her to come west and be his wife. At the bottom, in her mother's handwriting, Beatrice had written, "The day I answered this letter was the day my life truly began." Emma shared the letter with her siblings, and they all agreed it should be kept safe, a treasure to pass down to future generations. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures require the greatest courage, and that taking a risk on love could change everything. The Palmer Ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, and eventually under his children. The family never forgot Beatrice's legacy. They continued her tradition of training horses with patience and compassion, of offering second chances to those who needed them, of remembering that fear was not weakness, but simply an obstacle to be overcome with love and support. Years later, when Thomas's granddaughter asked him about the three graves on the hill, he told her the whole story. He told her about Beatrice's brother Thomas, the original tragedy that had created such profound fear. He told her about how his father, Grant, had loved his mother enough to help her face that fear. He told her about Promise, the honey-colored foal who had been the bridge between terror and triumph. "The point," Thomas said, putting his arm around his granddaughter, "is not that your great-grandmother overcame her fear. The point is that she did not have to do it alone. Your great-grandfather stood beside her every step of the way, never judging, never rushing, just offering his steady presence and unwavering belief that she could do it. That is what love looks like. That is what it means to be a true partner. The girl thought about this as she looked at the 3 graves. Then she asked, "Do you think she ever regretted coming west?" Thomas smiled. "Not for a single day. This place, this life, it gave her everything. Purpose, family, healing. She told me once that fear had kept her trapped in a small, dark life. Coming here, facing that fear, it set her free." As the sun set over the Nebraska prairie, painting the grass in shades of gold and amber, Thomas and his granddaughter walked back down the hill together. In the corral below, the horses moved peacefully, their hoofbeats a gentle rhythm. It was a sound that had once meant terror, but now meant home. And on the hill behind them, 3 graves stood together, marking 3 lives that had been intertwined in ways both painful and beautiful. A boy who had died too young, a horse who had offered healing, a woman and a man who had found in each other exactly what they needed. The wind whispered through the prairie grass, carrying with it the memory of all those who had loved and been loved in this place. The story of Beatrice and Grant Palmer became legend in that part of Nebraska, told and retold, changing slightly with each telling but always keeping its essential truth. That love could heal even the deepest wounds, that patience and kindness could transform fear into strength, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was to trust again. The Palmer family continued for generations, always keeping alive the values that Beatrice and Grant had established. They were known for their integrity, their skill with horses, and their willingness to help those in need. The ranch became a place of healing for many, just as it had been for Beatrice all those years ago. And always on that hill overlooking the prairie, the 3 graves stood as a testament to a love story that had begun with a letter, had been tested by fear, and had triumphed through patience, courage, and unwavering commitment. It was a reminder that the greatest journeys often begin with the smallest steps, and that with the right person by your side, anything was possible. The mail-order bride who had arrived in Fort Kearny in 1873, clutching her carpetbag and trembling at the sight of a horse, had become Beatrice Palmer, rancher, horsewoman, mother, and beloved matriarch. Her story was one of transformation, but more than that, it was a story of love, the kind of love that sees someone at their most vulnerable and chooses to stay, the kind of love that offers patience when everything else demands haste, the kind of love that believes in possibilities when fear insists on impossibilities. Grant had given her that love, freely and fully. And in return, Beatrice had given him her trust, her partnership, and her heart. Together, they had built not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of compassion and courage that would endure long after they were gone. As the stars emerged over the Nebraska prairie, shining down on the Palmer Ranch and the 3 graves on the hill, the wind carried the echo of hoofbeats, the memory of laughter, and the enduring power of a love that had conquered fear, and transformed 2 lonely souls into a family that would span generations. It was a good story, a true story, and one that would never truly end. For as long as the Palmer family continued, as long as horses ran free on the prairie, as long as people needed reminding that fear could be faced and overcome, the story of Beatrice and Grant Palmer would live on. And that was exactly as it should be.